Hey paddlers, actually today I'm going to say water sports enthusiast because we are going to be talking with someone in England who is truly versed in many watercraft in many different ways and has played many roles in water sports through the years. So really honored to get to talk to Steve West. I think he's originally from England and has ended up back there, but he has lived and traveled all over the world, known in many of the communities, especially windsurfing, outrigger paddling, and stand-up paddling. So super, oh, I see some people I know. Thanks for joining us. So I believe it's 11 o'clock there. So thank you, Steve, to start with, for even doing this. There's Sarah in England. Thanks for staying up late, you guys. It looks like we have a couple people request to join. Well, Anne in England, I love you, but unless Steve is on your line, I'm going to try to find Steve. There he is. He's got fans all over the world, I know, and really excited to talk, yes, about stand-up paddling, but he's really got a big picture. There he is. It's the man.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
I can. How about
Oh,
me?
great. Good,
Good
good.
sound?
Yeah, you've gone a bit quiet now. That I've come online.
Okay, turned it up a little bit. But we can see you. That's fantastic. Thank you
Okay.
for doing this in the evening. I know it's a little bit late there, but super excited to talk with you. I don't know if you heard the little introduction. Are you originally from England? I forgot to ask that.
Well, actually, I was born in West Africa, so I grew up in West Africa. Uh,
Okay, so
yeah,
you have truly lived on many continents and islands, and we'll be talking
yeah,
about that.
quite a strange life, actually. I'm always asked, because I lived in Australia for quite a number of years. When I went there, I used to go to parties. People say, "Where are you from?" And I really couldn't give them a straight answer, to be honest. So I used to just say, "Oh, England," because it was easier.
Yeah, well, you have landed back there for whatever
Yep.
reason. But wow, what a it's interesting because sometimes I talk to people who specialize in coaching and da da da. Probably you're best known as an author, but you have served so many roles in the paddling and water sports world from starting, maybe not starting, you can tell us how you started, but you were a windsurfing professional for many years and traveling there, kind of switched at one point to outrigger. I think you said 25 years of outrigger paddling, including living in Australia, living in Fiji, I think.
Yep.
You've written probably the most prolific in outrigger. You have lots of different books and very specific books, and I know a lot of them. But the book that you wrote early in stand-up paddling is considered the Bible of stand-up paddling, and it really does still have so many. I haven't read it lately, but I did early on. I was trying to find my copy. I still don't have an autograph, by the
Oh,
way. I need to
is it?
meet you in person. There it is.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
and
good for a good doorstop. Yeah.
no, but it has wonderful chapters, and I think that might be one of the things we kind of look at is like what because you wrote it in 2012
I actually,
or published.
yeah, look, it took 5 years to write. And I was really, because of the sport's evolving so quickly, it's really hard to keep up with it. And you write a chapter and throw it away and start again. But I actually resolved to sort of eventually just block out the white noise and sort of focus more on what I knew and what I could learn from taking from paddle sports, and particularly other paddle sports. And historically, I thought it was very interesting the debates that were going on.
Hmm.
Is it a surf sport? Is it a paddle sport? I mean, that was the crux of the matter, and still remains to this day a big sort of question mark for a lot of people. And it's taken some years to sort of get to a point where perhaps people are finally getting to grips with what it actually is by definition. There are different genres of the sport, of course. You've got the guys in the surf and guys that do downwind and people want to race. Or the vast majority aren't in it for a sport at all. It's just purely a recreation, and I think that's the key. And I think this whole COVID virus has been very interesting because racing has taken a massive hit. But in saying that, it hasn't slowed the growth of interest down. I mean, this year in Europe, I mean, the growth has
The
now
growth, yeah. North America
mad.
also. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
crazy.
Yeah.
So, you have to ask yourself, what gravitas do you give to racing? I mean, I give some gravitas to it, but I don't think that it's the be all and end all because really, it really is fundamentally about getting on the water, having fun, and not being, you know, I, I'm probably not the right, well, because I've coached all of my lifetime, yes, have to be very technical in my lifetime, but I also know that there's huge advantages in just, learning through discovery, just getting out there and learning and not necessarily being shown very much at all. So long as you don't A, injure yourself or B, put anyone else in harm's way. But as long as you go out there and self-discover through learning, then I think that's a very good way to begin. And ultimately there are issues like avoiding injury and being blown out to sea and those sort of issues. But fundamentally, that's been the appeal of the sport. Pick up a paddle and go and just kind of, muck along and get there in the end and get some pointers along the way. And the biggest thing you still see today is people paddling with this paddle around the wrong way. That's about it. That's about the worst cardinal sin.
Yeah, so true. That's so true. Safety with this new wave, safety is another thing we're a little bit concerned about. But I want to talk about you first a little bit. So and I love that you have kind of that true and overarching like vision and view that it is really a recreational activity. And many of us, and I love that comes from someone who has been very competitive as an athlete and as a coach for many years, that you're able to see that, because like many things in life, I do find a lot of people have blinders on. It's often geography, it's their background, and they see this as only the surf sport or the paddle sport, and not the true. I just think it's this wonderful fusion and just such a versatile, easier watercraft than a lot of the watercraft. Not that the others aren't absolutely fantastic, but I know, you've spoken a lot to that about, windsurfing and seeing some of the things that we needed to avoid. And hopefully, since you wrote the book, you've seen, I think we've managed to do that, not make it too complicated, not make it only about the specialty, even though we have lots of specialty. But back up, windsurfing, water experience, did you grow up next to the coast and start off in the water from young?
Sure. I mean, when I'm living in West Africa, I was in Nigeria, then I was in Sierra Leone, and then after that we moved to East Africa. So we're in Tanzania on the other side of the east coast of Africa. And, we're always on the coast. So I grew up, my dad game fishing, and then I was spear fishing, and I was diving, and I was in the surf, and I was sailing boats, and, forever on the water. So I couldn't imagine ever being anything else. And then we were living in Mauritius, which is a little island off Madagascar, for about 4 years when I was between 14 and 18 years of age. And again, it was all just water sport based. And I had a meeting there actually. I don't know if remember Jacques Cousteau and
Oh yeah.
So I met Jacques Cousteau, and I met his one of his sons actually, and they asked me, I was going to college at the time. I was doing boarding school, flying back to England and back and forth, And I was asked to go and work on the Calypso. I wanted to be a marine biologist, and my father refused. Said, no son of mine's you've got to go and finish school. So I reluctantly went and finished school, which is a massive mistake. And when I finished, my dad said, well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I really hadn't a clue. And I sort of pretty much just sort of got a university sort of thing out, went like that, and ended up doing yacht design. So I went to the university for about 3 days. And I was listening to it was just talk and chalk. There was a guy wearing hush puppies and a tweed suit and had chalk, and he was just scratching on the board. And I thought, well, I just spent 10 years in a boarding school, away from home, and I didn't want to be institutionalized. I said, that's it, I'm going. So I just left, and then I went to windsurfing and became a professional windsurfer. And I took up photography, and in fact, I was writing. That was paying my way a lot, and I went to editors. They said, hey, son, do you have a camera? And I said, no. So, well, buy one. You need to take photos with your stories. And I started doing photography as well. So I was able then to, make my living by reviewing equipment. And I learned about design of equipment, which, working with some great people who taught me as I was getting older, and just learned. And then I got to about 22, I guess, and I went to Australia. And my father he was a yachtsman. He'd sell a yacht over from Fiji, and living in Australia. So I flew over there, all my equipment, and and spent the winter there windsurfing. And I basically didn't come back. So I was there for 26 years. But then I was windsurfing, consistently for about 10 years, and I burnt out. I mean, I had an amazing contract at one point. I was employed to be on the water 6 days a week for 5 hours a day. And I could have 1 day off, and I had to go to all the events, and it's kind of crazy.
Wow.
And so it does burn you out. And I only did that for about 2 or 3 years, but then I faded off into doing other things in windsurfing. But that sort of really, I learned a lot actually because I learned a lot about burning out in sports, and I see that. This is a bit of a side shoot, but I see it in stand-up paddleboarding. I've seen it in outrigger canoeing, where
Hmm.
people they come into the sport and they don't ease their way into the sport. They just go at it 1,000 miles an hour, and they push and they live in it. They dream it. They wear it, sleep it, talk it, eat it, breathe it. I mean, yeah, I get it, but they don't pace themselves, and eventually they just, I've been doing this for, been on water for most of my life, and of course I'm not the only waterman in the world. There are plenty of other guys and girls out there that have done the same, but they've managed to keep this love for what they do by not ending up resenting it, and sort of not expecting too much of it to the point that they get resentful of it. It doesn't meet their expectations, and of course, competing is one of the things that will do that to you in a heartbeat. If you come in it to sort of race with an expectation and that doesn't work out for you, you can get your ego bent and you don't cope well and you leave, and that's a shame because that's not really the relationship you should form with water sports. I mean, this is a thing that you should do. Ideally, you should do it. You can do it for the rest of your life,
Hmm.
rather than sort of go in and burn out early and leave. So I learned that through windsurfing. The idea is sort of being professional is all well and good, but it can really take the wind out of your sails, literally. And then for me, yeah. So going back to your original question, yes, it was always around water, so it was
Yeah.
a natural transition. But when I moved to Australia, well, that really taught me so much, and I was very fortunate in my years living in Queensland, on the Sunshine Coast, in Australia, in
Hmm.
Mooloolaba, which is probably one of the epicenters in the world of where watermen and women grow up, and they produce some of the best in the world. And it's just I learned, as I say, just the respect that I had for them, was overwhelming, and I learned, and most of all, I felt very proud that I was sort of accepted, by them in a way, because to have them take me under their wing and sort of treat me like an Aussie. And I think I would meet people after being there for 25 years and competing and racing for Australia, things like Molokai and all over the world racing. People always thought me an Aussie. They didn't really think me as a Pommy, as an Aussie.
Mommy.
Um, and in that journey, I think it made me who I was, and I think that I made a commitment to myself that whether I made money or didn't make money, that was absolutely never going to be my driver. Making money was never going to be the thing that would drive me to keep on doing what I'm doing, because I love to learn. I love to share what I learn, and I'm not. I don't want to be an egomaniac. I mean, that's why I'm not even on Instagram, because actually I can't cope.
We had to
uh,
make Steve create an account so that he could do this interview.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm an embarrassment. I'm sorry, people, but there you
No,
go.
no.
Um, I know I should be a bit more effusive about this sort of thing. I think technology is great, but I think by the same token, I spend many hours in front of a computer, whether I'm designing or writing, and I think because of that, by the end of the day, I'm not going to sit on the couch and start
Yeah.
flicking through and like,
Hmm.
I'm done.
I agree. It has its positives. It's for me, it's been such a connector
Yeah.
now,
Oh,
and it's actually all the way through, and it's how I've met people around the world,
sure. Yeah.
met and then, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
but definitely has its drawbacks too. And yeah, it's well documented too.
Well, it's that
Uh,
burnout I'm talking about, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, actually, same kind of thing. But
Yeah.
really good points, kind of really good points that are so true of everything. But the burnout thing I think is important. I'm not going to get burnt out because I started this so late. I don't have enough time left in my life when I started this approaching 50, and have been at it over a decade. So I'm not worried about that. But if it's going to be that lifelong thing, but I just found it a little bit late, so can't. For me, it's just avoiding injury and other type things.
Yeah.
So the transition in Australia was to outrigger paddling. You
Yes.
mentioned doing
Yeah.
that and paddling for Australia, and you've been to those big races all around the world. But
Yeah.
interesting that you realized early, the money thing, you have to have you have to love the water and love what you're doing. And how wonderful that you had writing and just the whole way through from the beginning, because that definitely has been a huge part of what you've given back, how you've shared.
Yeah. Well, I'm probably one of the most overeducated watermen in the world, because I had a very good education, the sort of the best that money could buy, and in a British boarding school. People like me, I'm supposed to, I'm somebody in the same ilk as going to Eton or Harrow or Rugby or any of these massive schools. I mean, I think I was one of the top 6 or 7 in the whole of Britain. And everyone comes out, they're gynecologists or lawyers or, something. And that wasn't going to be me. I was always the antichrist of authoritarian. And they all knew that. They all knew that about me. In fact, even today, most of my friends who are from that background, they'll sort of use me as their yardstick, and they're all sort of old and grey now, and they probably have definitely got a lot more money than I have. But they all say they'd swap it tomorrow for the experiences that I've had, and but I've had to. And the other thing is interesting over the years, you get so many young kids and girls too, girls and boys who sort of that they want to live a similar life. They want to sort of, well, how do you get a job like that? And I sort of tell them, well, you won't see it's not advertised in the newspaper. That's the first thing you need to know. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, make sure you become a master of many things, not even a jack of all trades, but you need to sort of master things by decades. So, they spend 10 years doing something and 10 years doing another and 10 doing another and 10 doing. By the time you get to by 40 to 50 years of doing something, provided you're fit and healthy, you can come out the other end and have a lot to offer to, whether it's to companies or to talking to people like yourself or in writing. And I suppose it's this becoming from a boy to a man, I suppose, or at least becoming like at least gaining. If you haven't gained any wisdom along the way, you're a complete idiot, aren't you? Let's face it. But you have to be you have to be a little bit, unless you're a Kai Lenny or someone where you're going to get an absolute ton of cash just for doing crazy things and and being born in the right place and having the advantages of, say, like a Robbie Naish to give you a mentoring and so much. I mean, that's just epic, But in time, so he doesn't necessarily have to rely on writing and photography and stuff, But then again, I don't think I'd even be content with that because writing a monstrous way or doing some crazy stuff actually isn't still educating anybody about anything. It's just like, wow, but it's not actually getting down to the nitty gritty of educating. I think so. Giving is the best thing you can do. Like, what's the point of acquiring knowledge if you don't share it? It's absolutely pointless. That's what I think. I like to be. Whenever I've given, in Australia, I was the national coaching director for about 6 years. And I used to work with a very close friend of mine, Chris Maynard, who's an incredible athlete. A guy that Travis Grant he mentored off of me. Travis, a very close friend to Travis. And Travis will tell you, it took a village to raise him, but the skills that he's got has come from so many people. He knows that. He's such a humble man, and Chris is the same, But we used to go to run these clinics all over Australia and even overseas at times. And by the end of a weekend of talking, I certainly would be absolutely spent because there's nothing left in my brain. And I think it was wonderful to be able to be asked so many questions and tell so many stories and have people laughing about stories that have come out of Tahiti and the Marquesas Islands, or whether you've been in Saipan or the Cook Islands or racing in New Zealand or wherever we'd been in the world. We had these fantastic stories. Now, if I'd have left school and gone be an accountant, I wouldn't have a story to tell, And that's actually what makes me quite boring too, because if I go to well, no,
I don't think you're boring.
No, don't take this the wrong way, but if I go to a dinner party, I'm sure if you had Laird Hamilton sat, I'm not comparing myself with him by any means, but if you had those sort of people sat around if you're sat at a table, all these other people really haven't led the same life as you have, you do feel a bit weird because it's not relatable. Some of the things you're talking about are not very relatable. They just, so you feel like you're sort of being a smart ass and sort of, oh yeah, he's talking himself up. He's been there and he's done that. And, so I feel a little uncomfortable sometimes. And that's why I tend to keep a little bit to myself. I don't really try to brag too much about what I've done or where I've been. I love talking about it. Absolutely.
Well, we love hearing about it and reading about it. And thank goodness there are still formats like books. But you also have educated, you mentioned doing clinics, but you have been, talk a little bit about like the ASI that you were the director of. You were a co-founder of the WSA, which I'm sure we have some people and are still involved in that, I think. And
Yeah.
there have been these new ways of imparting wisdom. Like we won't be able to, you have so much deep knowledge. And I know you've, like, for instance, just done webinars on very specific topics, which we can send people to, like the WSA. But how, I mean, having that base of a great education has gifted all of us because you have a great way of communicating on a lot of different levels. So I'm glad you aren't too quiet and too humble, and you are sharing your knowledge. And I find it fascinating. So don't ever think people don't want to hear your story.
Yeah. And it's a cultural thing too. And again, don't take this the wrong way, but of course, because I'm a quiet sort of, I'm sort of what
a
am
Brit,
I?
and I'm an American.
I'm quasi English. I'm born in Africa, and I'm an only child. I've got I'm very much always just please myself, I suppose. I'm selfish, which is great because actually most water people are selfish because it's all about me. I want to go on the water. I don't mean that in a bad way. You know what I mean? All you water people out there know what I mean, okay?
Yeah.
If I'm not happy, then I can't make anyone happy around me. I've got to be happy doing the thing I love, and and my wife Mandy, who I love to pieces.
Yeah.
She's a
Bring
water
her in.
person.
I heard her sneeze or something. I think
She
she's right
gets
there,
it.
isn't she? Come
Yeah,
say hi,
she's hot.
Mandy.
Come say hello, Mandy. This is Mandy, who I taught to windsurf when she was 16.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask where she came
Yeah.
in the story. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Great to see you. You're
And
part
you,
of the
yeah.
whole, the Mandy and Steve West story.
Oh,
So windsurfing, huh? So you have known each other a long time. That's great.
yeah, a very long time,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I used to type for Steve when he was writing. He would dictate to me, and I had, the old typewriters that we had to push.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she'd be 16, 17. I used to write it out on paper, and she'd type it out on this old Olivetti typewriter. And then we used to cut the paragraphs off and move them around and photocopy them, send them off to the magazines.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I wonder how many people can't relate to that. That don't remember typewriters and, you made a mistake, I have to go back.
Yeah. No, it's all good. But no, it's
good times. But yes, there are cultural differences in how we present.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think, yeah.
Lovely to meet you.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you
Bye.
for saying hello. Hope to meet you in person sometime.
Yeah, you will. No, I guess that's my point. I think, I'm, whether or not English people are quieter sometimes about, they're not always. They can be quite vociferous, I can assure you. But I think this is the thing about stand-up paddleboarding. When I produced the book and I released it, and it sort of, there was a sort of, and when you release any book, there's always the first 2 to 3 months is when you're going to get the biggest sort of outpouring of people buying and reviewing and getting feedback. And it sort of was, absolutely, it was received very well. But at the same time, there was a few other books came out in America, which I thought was, was fantastic. I thought, okay, that's cool, and nothing quite as big as mine, but they were different and had a different approach, which is all absolutely necessary. But I sort of felt a little bit like America kind of took over a bit. I mean, they sort of had ownership of the sport, well, very much so. And I think I get it. But again, historically, that was windsurfing too. America had ownership of that. But then the Europeans came along and they did shift the goalposts a lot, and they became the biggest manufacturers, and became the Mistrals and the Starbers and the Fanatics, and there's a whole list of them. High Fly, Wingle, the whole stacks of stacks. So and it sort of happened in stand-up a lot too. But what I love about America is the fact that the entrepreneurial approach towards the sport has been phenomenal. I mean, you guys have taken something which at the end of the day is quite pedestrian and quite basic and primitive, and made it into something quite special. The way you've, like those guys in Lake Tahoe, making the way they sort of looked at their boards and how they sort of thought, they thought about the whole touring and the whole, they looked at things different. They weren't racing, they were doing something else. And then Todd Bradley is a mate of mine from years ago with C4 when he started. This is like back in 2004 or 5 when we started talking about it. And he was telling me in like 2005, 2006, he was saying, "Oh, Steve, man, like we're not selling any boards really on the coast. We're selling 80% inland, to rivers, lakes, and dams." And I thought, wow, that was interesting because there was
Hmm.
and again, there's all this. It's a surf sport. It's a surf sport. And you'd listen to Todd. He'd say, "No, it ain't no surf sport. All the money's inland." And you think, oh, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. And then I took up in 2005, and I mean, the Travis wasn't even paddling by then. There were a lot of guys who were in outrigger weren't paddling. There was a few of us in Australia doing it. And slowly they came into it, the Danny Chings and so on. And they came in it because there was a bit of money to be made. Why not? And, they set the bar really high very quick. And, but yeah, I'm mixing. I mean, then you go to Tahiti, where you get some of the best paddlers in the world, and it's taken them forever for them to get interested in the sport. I mean, they have this cauldron of incredible talent. And
Yeah. Well, it's such a cultural thing, it seems, right? From birth, you're going to be in
yeah,
your boat, and
yeah.
yeah.
But stand up, of course, isn't really a part of their culture. I mean, to them, sitting in a canoe makes sense, but standing and paddling is sort of a little bit
But they've
going
had
to the.
some real success when they find individuals who are willing to cross over.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the talent there is phenomenal. I mean, if they wanted to just down tools and stand up and paddle and to give away the paddling, you would be blown away by the talent. It's astonishing the depth of talent there, and I think if you go to Tahiti, there's always a lesson to be learned about paddling. It's an incredible place to go. If it's the nemesis for anyone that wants to go racing. Any anyone who goes down there for a lesson, it is a lesson. It's like, whoa, this is just unbelievable. I don't believe. I thought I was fast, but now I realize just I'm not even. It's an
Yeah.
incredible experience.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm not a lifelong water person, so I come at this from a different perspective, and I think we reach the same place in some things, but I love that you seem to have, strong opinions based on very valid, huge experience, huge history. I wasn't a paddler before. I've been a water person, but, competitive swimming, played a little bit with windsurfing, had three kids, raised,
yeah,
I've always loved water, but have never done it competitively except for swimming. So this paddling thing was so new and fresh to me in 2009. And I looked at this craft and said, okay, because I'd looked at things like we have outrigger here and everything. And, oh, I'd like that. I don't have the time for that, but this could be my individual thing. Oh, would I want to surf? Because I love to surf, or would I want to, how could I use it? Look at all these different ways I can use this versatile surfboard
yeah,
with a paddle,
yeah,
so I really see the hybrid. And then I totally value windsurfing. I mean, our working in the industry, all these windsurfing companies were our big companies. They already had international distribution. You kind of pointed that out. They're already making a board the size of the stand-up paddle. So the starboards, they were destined to like be early,
yeah,
and I'm glad that most of them, Mistral, have stayed with it. And then of course, canoe and kayak and paddling and technique. I mean, I try to emulate outrigger paddling, although I've never been on a team. To me, that's the closest, we're standing, that makes a lot of changes and where it affects us,
yeah.
the biomechanics and everything, but I'm definitely trying to
Yeah.
outrigger paddle.
It's canoe boarding, isn't it? I mean, I remember years ago I was looking at the
Hmm.
nomenclature of this. And I thought to myself, there must have been three guys sitting at a bar, had too much to drink, and they came up. What should we call it? Well, let's really call it something really confusing, like stand-up paddleboarding. And it's just such a gobble, isn't it? It's like, I mean, you
That
know,
is a,
like kiteboarding makes sense, windsurfing makes sense, stand-up paddleboard. It's just, and the nomenclature is incorrect because it's a verb intransitive. It doesn't work. You can't be. It's like a command. Well, stand up and paddle. So it's kind of already wrong. I mean, standing paddling makes sense, but again, you couldn't really say that. And I thought to myself, why don't they just call it canoe boarding? It's standing up, it's canoeing on a board, basically. But it was too late by then. It was a runaway horse. It had gone. Oh, well, you can't do anything about it now. And
yeah,
some sort of
but the
works, but
language is still such an issue. There's 18 variations on
oh,
stand-up paddle, and whether you put them together, and whether like the writers tend to
yeah,
hyphenate,
yeah,
and
yeah,
anyway, I think it's just crazy, and I think it's important at some point, because things like this technology and Google searching, it does matter what you call it actually.
yeah,
And it's part of, like you said, people haven't quite ironed out exactly what they think of it, and I think it's added to the confusion in some ways.
yeah, 100%.
Paddleboarding is now being used, which my traditional paddleboard friends do not like.
No.
Paddleboarding has become the word to use for stand-up paddleboarding. Well, paddleboarding already existed. It's
Yep.
traditional or prone paddleboarding, but they don't want to be called that, at least some of the people I know. And so we've kind of stolen this word, which I feel bad about, but that's how things
Yeah,
happen.
I mean, SUP is an anagram, for crying out loud. I mean, it's that bad. We just call it SUP. I mean, it's like AKA or anything else. I mean, it's just an abbreviation. And I mean, that very topic I have in my book, because I get right back to the brass tacks of it. And actually, that brings me to a very interesting concept of discussion about design. I mean, I think when the early race boards were being developed, and the proper race boards, not talking about tongue depressors, but actually when they were starting to build proper displacement boards, it was interesting that really they got it wrong, because they were. And why? Well, it's because a lot of the guys that were designing in the early days were from a windsurfing background. They were designing planing boards that had a sail on it that was going 30 knots, and somehow they decided that when you're standing and paddling, that the propulsive powers were exactly the same. So the hydrodynamics would be the same within the board. Nonsense. So you're in a situation where you need to design a displaced board that will never much go beyond displacement speed. Forget planing; it's not a concept unless you're down when you're on the surf. So it's let's be reasonable. And it wasn't until Joe Bart got involved, Jamie Mitchell got involved, and Brian Szymanski got involved. When these guys came into the town, well, of course, they come from a prone paddleboarding background, and they know that you are operating at displacement speeds. Therefore, you need to design the most hydrodynamically efficient thing you possibly can with low drag coefficients, given the fact that you are standing and you're going to have this rolly twitchiness. So how much displacement can you build into a board before you can't stand on it any longer? And so that became an interesting design challenge. And that really it started happening about, I don't know, maybe, trying to give you probably 2010, 11, 12.
Yeah.
That sort of, when people started really getting into proper race board designs. And even now,
some look like the starboard one that looked like a shoe. It's interesting that the dugout now is kind of there. My first race board in 2010, 11 had a full displacement hull made by I think an Australian yacht designer, but it didn't take into account enough that an older female without great balance who hadn't been a paddler before, it was just so tippy, and it had that secondary stability. Anyway, it was interesting to be a part of watching things go from, like you said, tongue depressor, I haven't heard it called that before, but just the flat slappy surfboard style, which works for surfing in some things, but to going a little bit too far sometimes. But design has been interesting, and as much as things have changed, and I really am interested to see how much you've watched. We haven't been around very long, and you were in it early. 15 years is probably the most people have really been focused on it who were in really early, but there weren't numbers till about 2009 and 10 when I was getting into it, and that's in specific areas. It's so interesting to me, your perspective, that you see North America kind of owning it, the US, some of these things, because I never know, having lived here in the same state my whole life, I don't have that same perspective of you living around the world. And that's so interesting to me, because I think of windsurfing is still big, isn't it, in Europe, but isn't so much here. It's kiting.
Yeah, windsurfing is, look, I do a lot of work for Bistro in their design and development area, and we're sort of, we're constantly having this sort of battle of, well, how much money do you invest in windsurfing in terms of trying to bring it back? And the big thing now is foiling. So I mean, but wing foiling, using foil boards, that's become more of the thing, with the sort, and that's kind of cool too, because it's very low impact. It's a low impact entry into foiling, which is kind of cool. And it's also existentialism. It's a little bit, it's not that far removed from stand-up paddleboard. I mean, this time you're just holding a kite in your hand, so it sort of gets you, springboards into something else reasonably quickly into a wind sport. So there's potentiality for that. But I don't want to upset anyone in America by saying I think it's a bad thing. No, it's not a bad thing, because from a contemporary standpoint, of course, that's where it began, and then you guys picked the ball up and ran with it. And but I think that because there's so much initially there was so much coming out of America. I don't think there is so much as there is now. I mean, it has become more of a level playing field. There's more coming out of Europe now, so it's balancing out. But in the early days, of course, it was for America, it had to be. That's where it was starting. But I think there was sort of for example, the rest of the world never got a chance to have a say about 12'6" and 14.
Which is
Every country in the world was excluded from that argument. It's that we were just told by America that's how it is. And if you look at the story of how that came about, it's the most absurd story in the history of anything.
Agreed.
You know, let's just take pro and paddle boards and we'll just pick a stock board at 14 and a clubby style tile board at 12'6", and we'll use that as our yardstick without any sort of contemplation of the issues of waterline length or whole sort of efficiency in relation to standing and paddling, a whole bunch of stuff. So in other words, we didn't even have the smarts to say, well, this is a standalone sport and we should actually treat it as such. What we'll do is we'll piggyback ride and steal from another, which is completely unnecessary. And forevermore, there's been this ridiculous argument, and it just goes on and on. It's still not resolved fully. When in fact, you can't invent a sport on a Wednesday and create rules by Friday. It's just ludicrous.
Yeah, but life does run that fast, and that is what happened. And I think it's true of many. I think there's a lot of things we need to relook at that we just borrowed from other. It's by law in the United States, you must have a personal flotation device, but we pulled them straight off of kayak. And then they did make well, anyway, we're a vessel in those ways, and then there's things. The leash. I think how we wear a leash, I do think they're an important tool. I like them for safety reasons, but if you're not surfing, why do you have it in the same position as a surfer? Does it need to be there? Does it need to be the same materials? I think there's so many things we could still look at. And I think the 12-6-14 has been such a time suck argument. And I loved that Jimmy Terrell threw out, 3 meters. Why don't we just merge them? They're only 18 inches apart. And let's have one, which did end up being an issue at, as in some places we've had our ups and downs. There were too many divisions and too many board sizes. And that's very interesting, that perspective. If you could go back and change us or it jumping in right away into those two, what would you make the board size? Do you have any thoughts on that design-wise?
Well, in the first place, I made it unlimited to begin with, because you have to create an unlimited mindset in order to create any chance of determining what actually should be the optimum average to create. And I think that you look at windsurfing. When we were windsurfing, we used to have weight divisions. So you'd be weighed, you get weighed, and you would say you're in lightweight, medium, or heavyweight, and that became the yardstick. When you race laser dinghies, for example, you are measured in terms of your height. Why? Because when you're on a trapeze, there's leverage advantages. If you're 6'7" as against 5'7", the 6'7" guy's got leverage advantages. So the idea is to create a level playing field. Now you can't, for example, you can apply those rules to paddling to some degree. Now, you could start going down a weight rule thing if you like. You could go down to a height rule, saying, well, this guy can more leverage. But there are so many different things about paddling. I think someone with more money has got an advantage and someone hasn't got money. Someone that's sponsored has got advantage over someone who hasn't. I think DNA. Someone that's short and stumpy is at a disadvantage to someone that's tall. So life isn't fair. There's so much stuff out there that makes it difficult. But I think in terms of boards, I think that, when you start, we saw it, for example, 12'6" boards, you started putting 80, 90 kilogram paddlers, sort of, I can't do that in pounds for you, but I mean, heavy paddlers, let's put it that way, on 12'6" boards were disadvantaged. And that's where I remember the first rumblings of problems coming along, where the heavy riders said, no, I want to be on a 14 because I sink a 12'6". It makes no sense to me. But right there in that logic, you can understand that for some people, a 12'6" board is going to go faster for them than a 14. And for some people, they're going to go faster on a 14 than they will on a 12'6". You take the Molokai Channel race. If you go on a prone paddleboard, Jamie Mitchell, a very close friend of mine, 10-time prone paddleboard champion. I mean, probably the finest, greatest water sports athlete of all time. This guy's insanely fit at his peak. But he'll tell you that on some days you can do the channel on a 12-6 board and actually smoke it because you've got short periods between the waves and, you know, boom, 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 especially like Kona winds blowing and so forth, like a headwind. He's going to win he's been beaten by guys on 12-6 on days when he's on the unlimited. Why? Because his is way too long. It's not fitting between the sets. He's struggling all day long.
Yeah.
So, you know, how long's a piece of string? But I think that probably the biggest thing we're faced with at the moment is this concept of the stand inside paddleboard, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, when a lot of the world's top racers prefer to stand inside something than stand on top of something, you have to ask yourself as a designer and as a rule maker, you know, these guys and girls are saying something loud and clear. You know, this is what they want. And you can argue all day long that this isn't a surf sport, or rather it's a surf sport, not a canoe sport. But actually, at the end of the day, my vision would be, or my if there was ever a chance this was going to be an Olympic sport, and frankly, it's about as much chance as a duck flying to the moon, but we'll see. Because why? Because we can't even agree on the most fundamental basics. But at the end of the day, you know, it would be a stand inside type craft, because you look at all the great Hungarian paddlers and the German paddlers and the Swiss paddlers, and these guys are coming from Olympic backgrounds in canoeing and kayaking. They want something to stand inside. They want it to be super fast. They got no interest in paddling planks. They're just not interested, because that's where they're at in their mindset. And I think that's really, we have to consider that.
Super interesting. But to your point, I think there's an argument. It depends what kind of race it is too. And some are arguing, you know, if it's a technical in the surf, it might be, to your point, a shorter board could beat a longer board because of intervals and waves and turns and technique. And maybe that's when you want something that allows you to do what, again, if you put the top surfers against the top canoeists, they're going to be, you know, a 200-meter straight sprint, those high kneel canoeists, they're almost right there. And that's already sort of been proven. But if you make it that short technical race, what's really different than those Olympic canoeists, what they don't have is turning. And so if you got that spinning around buoys and using waves, you know, board choice might not always be. I'm just using your own logic. There's a lot to be ironed out, as you said.
There is. But I was amazed. I mean, if you look at downwind boards in the last 3 to 4 years, I mean, they've got more and more dugout, and there are, except for days when it's exceptional. You know, when it's exceptional, you know, I'm talking when it's gnarly and just a little bit loopy. Then, you know, you kind of want to be. A lot of guys and girls prefer to be on a flatter board on those days, something a bit more deck space you can run around on, but. You know, you avoid swamping and a whole bunch of issues. But I think at the end of the day, you know, my fundamental point is that Olympic style type racing, which probably would come down to primarily being sprints and marathon type racing and not necessarily so surf oriented, probably would be the dugout style would probably win over. But again, if you're talking ins and outs through surf, then you're probably going to end up something that's flattish as far as the deck configuration is concerned. But even then, people still prefer if they can get down lower, because you see, there's always this need for speed. They always want to, the more displaced their board can be, particularly up in the front section, working through to the midsection. The rear section can can be flattened out to a planing surface. That's not an issue. If you stand back on the back of the board, the front's out anyway. That's irrelevant now. So there are, I tell you what, of all the boards I've had to design, the hardest is absolutely for sort of the battle of paddle style board, where you want to go out and come back, because the expectation of the board's performance is almost a mission impossible. You kind of want it to go out through surf,
versatile,
paddle in the flat out the back, and then you want to go around the buoy and come all the way back again through the surf, and you want a board to do it all. It's like, really? So, you know, that's like, well, actually, there's no such animal, but we can make a, you know, like a Bitzer board will kind of do some of it, but not all of it. You know?
Yes. And that's where I live, in the decision that I have to make of what kind of board, because I'm going in and out of harbors right at where Battle of the Paddle is, and sometimes trying to surf it and all. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, I was going to say, I think it's a shame though, when we have to talk about those sort of topics, it does become quite political and people go sort of very hot under the collar about it. But I think if they understood the hydrodynamics a little bit better, or more sort of, you know, take emotion out of it. Emotion's not important in this issue. It's just really what is absolutely relevant. And also, look at history in terms of other sports that have been developed. You know, you don't have to sort of we can't look into stand-up paddleboarding too deeply without looking into prone paddleboarding or windsurfing or kayaking, canoe shapes and designs, because that's where all of our DNA comes from, or at least design comes from. Design, sort of impetus. You know, so you know, as long as people are open-minded and
Yeah. Well,
then
I
it's
would
not a
love to.
problem.
I think discussions are the solution to us keep getting stuck in these ruts, but you have to find people who are willing to have those open discussions.
Yeah.
I think we need a lot more of them in stand-up paddling, personally. But you have helped design certification programs.
Yeah.
That the ASI was, when you were ASI, was it more that's based out of Australia? It's all over the world. I know we have it in the US. It's one of the
Yeah.
certification programs that's surfing and also stand-up
Yeah.
paddleboarding
Yeah.
instruction. But WSA does something similar to that, as well as they do some great stuff in terms of
Yeah. Yeah.
education, travel.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I can't remember the dates now. It must have been 2009-ish or 10-ish, I guess. And I got a phone call from. Actually, it wasn't. Yeah, it was a text message I got from Jamie Mitchell, and he said, "Hey, Westy, someone's going to call you soon from the ASI about perhaps doing some work in England and through Europe with this the ASI." I said, "Okay." So I got a phone call, and I spoke with a lady called Tanya Nesbitt, and we spoke, and I ended up sort of taking that role of setting up the stand-up paddleboarding program. But of course, all the work that I did for it became part of their global sort of syllabus, as it were. So there was Jamie, basically his brother Justin had, basically how it happened is Justin wanted to create a stand-up paddleboarding school on the Gold Coast in Australia, and the council said to him, "Well, you can't do that unless you're certified." He said, "Well, how can I be certified? And there is no certification."
Yeah.
So it's cart before the horse thing, you know.
Yes, we had quite a lot of that at the beginning, the catch
Yeah, so
22.
it's kind of like, what a ludicrous question. Okay, so they then went to the ASI and said, we need a program. So then Jamie sat down with Justin, they kind of wrote something out, and they created like a level 1 entry, you know. So I looked at that, and I ended up reworking it a little bit. They'd pretty done a great job, but I just reworked it a bit. They did some stuff for the waves as well. They did a great job on that. We tidied that up a little bit. We created lesson plans that were sequential and, you know, more methodical in their process, because for me it was important there was actually structure, because if you're employing instructors, so Bill's doing Saturday and then he can't make Sunday, so then Susan takes over and she needs to take over from the point where he left off. You can't just have people randomly teaching the way that they think they should teach. You actually have to be a little bit more indoctrined than that, you know. So there is a manual that says day one you did, or first, you know, a process of building up to being in the water, basically. So so I created those, and then I sort of realized we had a problem with shore breaks and a whole bunch of other things. I said, well, you know, a lot of people are running schools from areas with shore breaks. So I then wrote an open water course. It was so we had sheltered waters and we had open waters. So if you were off an open beach, you know, how do you deal with shore break? How do you deal with currents and tides? How you deal with shipping and you know, shark nets or whatever it might be? Those sort of issues that we have to sort of contemplate. And in the meantime, a good friend of mine, Chris Rea, and Ollie Miles, he said they were really interested in doing a water safety program. So we actually wrote the very first stand-up paddleboard water rescue and safety award. And these guys are lifeguards. Chris has been a lifeguard instructor for years and years and years. And Ollie was with the RNLI, the Royal Naval Lifeboat Institute. So he had his knowledge. So we put this thing together. And it was really first class. I mean, the work that they had done was sensational. My job was more sort of, well, it was a bit of both. I was sort of putting in my 10 cents of my paddling knowledge and my writing skills, and we photographed, put it all together, and made a great program for that. And then it became mandatory. Every instructor has to do that first. You know, water safety rescue is like the number one thing you need to do. Then you do a foundation course, and then you get to pick, you know, what your interest is. Is it surf? Is it downwind or whatever?
And is that all still part of ASI, or is this now?
Still part of ASI, yeah. I mean, I wrote the downwind one too, which was like 100 page manual. And it's got everything in it from, basic water safety, using, just, I can't begin to tell you what is in it, but it's monstrous. Which it kind of needs to be, because downwind is so, it's so open to issues. You have levels of downwind, levels of wind strength, levels of sea size, sea state, and so on, distances traveled, and so on. So it's very, very in depth. So I wrote all those, and I implemented them and did that for about 3 years, I guess. And I was pretty burnt out, and I thought, right, I'm going to go to Fiji. So I went to Fiji, and actually I was in Fiji for 6 months. And when I was in Fiji, I wrote this book.
Oh yeah.
That's all about. It's all about paddling one-man outrigger canoes, V1s, without a rudder. And I wrote this one as well, which is pretty much all about paddling. That's a lot of Travis Grant images in here, actually.
Yeah.
Lots of Travis in there. But I wrote a couple of books in 6 months. I just churned them out. And whilst I was there, Chris got in contact with me, and he had left the ASI, and he said, "Look, really, really bummed you guys have left. You're Manny, because you were like holding the thing together, and you're doing such a great job, and you left, and it kind of sucks. And what are we going to do? We don't want to be there anymore." And I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" They said, "Well, we'd like to start something up that's different." I said, "Well," because now another chap called Ben Longhurst, he runs a whitewater centre in Wales, and he's very, very experienced swift water guy. So we put some together. I came up with a name, Water Skills Academy, and they agreed on that. We put it all together, and then I adopted and used some of what I knew to create more levels, and they could go, like preempting where it could go and where it should go. And they also live it. So they'll go to Norway and take people, or Nepal, and they'll take people and their instructors. I mean,
I first saw them because they had a trip to Bhutan, and they were going to be the first to go, in the rivers in Nepal and Bhutan. I mean, how amazing is that? And they were inviting people to go with them. So that has become a very popular thing. I get questions all the time about travels, expeditions. How do we go somewhere and, do this?
Yeah. And I think, I'm not sure if America is. I mean, America's a bit different, is it? Because there you can be a little bit more entrepreneurial. Again, it's that entrepreneurial thing that's encouraged. But in Europe, we're very, very, very much heavily administered, and so we have to be we're watched by the government all the time with things that we do.
And we have a different thing. Entrepreneurial, yes, but we have litigation. We have lawyers here in the U.S. and some of these safety things and warnings. Everybody sues if anything goes wrong. So that's not exactly in the same format, but a different type of control or government, or something you have to really watch out for. But I do think, yes, people start up businesses all the time. And that was a huge concern here, is that, do they know what they're doing? Do they have safety? Have they ever even been on the water? It's great. There's just a lot of passion here that isn't always backed, because again, we don't have, unlike most governments in the world, there's no Department of Recreation and Sport, which is an interesting struggle. We still do well in things like the Olympics, even though many sports have to fundraise for themselves and such. But getting off track, but really interesting point. So interesting to think about that and how things develop differently in different parts of the world because of that. But I love what I've seen from, and I think Ben's listening, what the WSA is doing and has become, and they keep getting very creative. And that's interesting that you see that too. Thinking outside the box, I would say, or outside the loop.
Yeah. I mean, those guys, both Ben and Chris, are far more professional than I am. They know that. I mean, what I mean by that? Well, it's because I'm more random. I'm sort of they don't love making rules and doing bits of paperwork, but they're so good at it. That's what I admire about them the most, is the fact that they're not only talented in what they do, but administratively they're very strong. And because they're strong with the admin, they do know how to dot the I's and cross the T's. That really is a testimony to their devotion to what they're doing. And they're serial watermen. They just absolutely love being in the water. This other thing makes me laugh sometimes, that, you get on forums, and you've got this white noise. This is how forums work. So sport comes along, it gets started, someone starts a forum, everyone's a beginner. blah, blah. It goes on for a while, but there might be a few experts around the world. These experts are asked to get on the forum, and they start contributing. The experts start to contribute, and these are genuine experts, not quasi, but people. There might be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and they really are dyed-in-the-wool experts. But very soon they get drowned out by the white noise of whatever it is, and they just don't come back. They just step away. They go, you know what? You guys can all have the forum. You can just thrash it out because we're not interested anymore. We're too busy on the water doing what we do, and you can just thrash it out on the forums, And it's a shame. It really is a shame. Now, when I was a kid writing for magazines, for 20 years writing magazines, and I spent some years publishing my own, the thing is that in the old days, if an editor would ring you up and, hey, Steve, would you work for us? Yeah, right, I'll write. And you would. And they were picking people because they had their expertise. You'd write these stories and you'd wait 6 months for a check, But it was very different back then. But now, of course, everyone's got an opinion. Everyone thinks they have a right to an opinion. And I sometimes have to say to people, you know what, I've worked very hard to have an opinion. And so you're going to have to work extra super hard to convince me differently, And,
Yes.
I think that's okay because that's why there are experts in the world at everything, and from your dentist to your local plumber. I mean, they're all experts. I'm not going to argue with my plumber about telling me about my ball cock's gone wrong. I'm just going, right, I'll fix it. I'm not going to argue. But there are 1,000 people lined up that will argue that don't have a clue about what ball cock is.
And the immediacy that social media and all has created. I mean, you used to get a print article and you weren't going to get that response immediately, even if there were maybe letters to the editor. Let's say a newspaper, at least it was even a day. Now you can have a firestorm and hundreds of responses back and forth between people in hours, not days, not weeks. It's
sure, and
very different. But not time to, maybe this is me being old, but, wisdom. People don't take time to digest things and to think about them and to think them through. There's so much just immediate reaction to stuff and delayed gratification. Anyway, that again, we've come up with 15 different topics that can be their own talk.
The thing is, though, that's not it's easy to explain, isn't it? Because when someone explains the meaning of life in 10 words, you wonder why people get upset about it. Whereas if you're I get frustrated when I devote my life to 5 years putting a book together, and then someone's got a question about something really simple, and I think to myself, my God, if you just spent 10 minutes of your life reading 2 pages of my book, or even many other people who've written great stuff, just go and immerse yourself in some knowledge and come away with a better perspective. But the idea of somehow taking offense at 3 lines on a forum is absolutely absurd, because you've just not put your brain in gear. And it's very hard to convey what you really mean, short of just get lost, those that sort of blatant attitude. But otherwise, it's very hard to explain what you mean, and especially something complicated. Like usually we're just talking about board design. Some people don't even know what displacement is, what a displaced hull is. They have no clue between what displacement hull speed is versus planing hull speed. They have not got a clue, but they'll argue with you all day long. In utter ignorance. You go, hang on, before we have this discussion, explain to me these concepts and then we can move forward. But if you don't understand, there's no point having the discussion in the first place, so
yeah. Well, I'm going to quickly interrupt you because sometimes Instagram likes to cut these off at an hour, and we just are about to hit an hour. But I do want to continue for a little bit longer because we could continue for a long time, but I also know it's probably time for bed there. I'm going to read okay. Collins Ralph. I'm not sure if you know who that is. Steve West is the absolute voice of reason on what we are struggling to understand on rapidly changing water sport world. Can listen to him all day long. Well, we won't keep you up all night long, but I do want to touch on a couple more things. Just would love some more kind of tips. And I don't even know where to go to. You as a writer, as a coach, as someone who has watched this sport for 10 years, you choose which of your many, many roles, tips and things to avoid, maybe just in terms of paddling, stand-up paddling in general, or getting into it, since there's new people.
Okay, well, probably the most important tip by the way, Colin, how you doing, buddy? Love you, buddy. Look, the thing is, I guess I come back to grassroots, when I wrote my book, and indeed when I was studying this, and this comes from 30 years of paddling outrigger canoes, and prior to that, kayaks, and God knows what else I've been on in my life. But, you know, one thing people tend to forget about the sport is that when it comes to equipment, the most important thing you'll own is the paddle. That's it. I don't, you know, it's like, and you know, that's not being sort of overly dramatic. It's just the reality. And you know, and in the beginning, it was that you'd walk into a store, and the guy would go, "Oh yeah, hi buddy, yeah, we got this great board here. It's a Duvalaki whatever, and it's a 12'6", and it's this and that and the other. Oh, you're gonna need a wetsuit. So here's the wetsuit. Yeah, brilliant. You're gonna need a roof rack because you're gonna get it on your car. And you're gonna need the accessory. Here's some gloves, and here's a hat. And oh, you hang on, something else. Oh, you're gonna need a paddle, but don't worry, it's free. Here you go. Here's a free paddle. It weighs a metric ton. It's made from aluminium. You'll love it. It's brilliant, you know." And so you go down, you got your U-Butte board as carbon fiber, you got your fantastic aerodynamically designed roof racks, and you got your fantastic wetsuit made from crushed bamboo, knitted by Nepalese monks. And then you go down to the river, and you got your
Heavy,
industrial paddle, and you think, oh my God, the board's slow, my arms ache, I hate this sport, I can't figure out why. And you know, you think to yourself, where's that salesman gone wrong? And you think, well, from day one, he's a muppet. He's not thought actually that the most important thing is the paddle. And what he should have done is, look, how much money you got? I got $1,500. Right, we're going to spend 300 of that on a good paddle, and the rest of it we'll just find what we can find, because you've got to have a good paddle. Because there's no such thing as a beginner paddle. It's nonsense. Every paddler, from a beginner to the expert, deserves a good one. Because even Danny Ching will paddle a bad board fast if he has a good paddle, but even Danny Ching will paddle a good board slow if he has a lousy paddle.
Oh my gosh, I love your story and your examples, and I'm with you on the paddle thing. And that's always when somebody who hasn't purchased yet, I always talk to them about the paddle, especially if they do have something heavy. It makes me so sad that it might have turned people off from water sports if they are using really shoddy equipment, and that's the piece that's most essential.
It's the fundamental thing. I mean, whether if you're playing a violin, you need a good bow. If you're playing cricket, you need a good bat. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And you've got to have that fundamental piece of equipment nailed down correctly. And you know what's ironic about great paddles is they will laugh. I've got some, I don't want to drop names, but I mean, Bob Zavrel, who has been on the scene for 100 years, the guy is a living legend. You know, he's been making paddles, carbon paddles particularly, for a very, very, very long time. Bob's up to New York, isn't he? And I've had his paddles for many years, and I first got introduced to those in the mid-90s through Todd Bradley, and we started using them. But prior to that, there's all the C1 paddlers, C2 guys that had been using them on rivers and lakes and dams. He was making paddles for Olympic teams and God knows what, and got into skis and ski binders and all sorts. But he makes an incredible, I mean, the quality of his paddle is astounding, you know. And, you know, I remember a story where I was paddling on the River Thames one time, and this guy, he was Italian, huge, like massive dude. He's wearing a typical Italian, had the bandolier on, he had the gold chain, the hairy chest, the muscles, you know. It was, hey, mate, you know. And I'm paddling next to him, and I'm quite a small, skinny runt by comparison, and I'm just sort of virtually not paddling at all, just sort of taking he's taking 2 strokes to every one of mine. He's struggling to keep up. He's got a fantastic board. And I said, what? He said, hey, Steve, I cannot paddle anymore. I'm sick of this sport. I said, why? Well, every day I go to the gym, you know, and I get strong. I cannot go as fast as you. And I said, well, okay. I said, well, here, try my paddle, you know. So he took my paddle. He's just gone. Just gone. I'm left with this paddle. And ironically, it was a carbon paddle, but of course there's carbon. Again, yeah, carbon does not mean it's great. So anyway, this carbon paddle must have weighed like 6 pounds. It was horrible. He says, I couldn't get him. So I spent the next hour trying to catch him.
trying to
catch him. And I catch up to him and say,
and you've got
give me my damn paddle back. And he says to me, I never knew it. All the time, it was my paddle. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm a fantastic, you know. And he just goes and buys a new paddle, and it changes his life. And you think, Well, and I've never forgotten that moment. I thought to myself, well, there you go. I know it's the truth. I knew that anyway. But it's great to have that sort of vilified and sort of made real and an actual experience. And so yeah, there's a good tip. That's probably the most important thing. Invest in a good paddle. Even if you could don't take up you decide to get out of the sport, you can still sell that paddle for probably less than 50. Take $50 off of it and sell it for what you damn near bought it for. It won't go to waste.
Mm-hmm.
But the paddles become your best friend. And when I was paddling outriggers, I think I probably, yes, I used to make some as well, but I probably had 20 to 30 different outrigger paddles. I've got stacks of them.
Wow.
And with the stand-up paddle, it became the same. I just had stacks and stacks of them. And now I actually design some and make some and get samples in occasionally that I test. So I've got those as well. But and that's really curious to sort of mix between all of them and get that quiver of paddles.
Yeah.
And between different on the same board with different paddles, it's amazing what a difference it makes to the board. And to me, I think, gee, that's a revelation. So that's that's my tip.
We do have to wrap it up, even though there had so many more things I wanted. To talk to you about, but I do want to, just in terms of the book, are there chapters you would change, or would you add a new chapter? You mentioned there's new things. I don't know if you're exploring things like the wing. I would guess that would be something you might have tried. There's these new little niche things.
Yeah.
But again, the big recreational picture, we had exponential growth, kind of a flattening for a few years. And during COVID, and who knew, we've got all these new people. I think around the world. You said it's happening in Europe. It's certainly happening here, where people have discovered the outdoors.
Yeah.
It's naturally, socially distant activity, so it was allowed to continue in a lot of places. But would you change or give any advice that's different, since you were early on in the book, even though it's a great book still and absolutely holds its own weight?
I probably would. I mean, I probably nothing grossly sort of in terms of a change, but I think probably what I would probably do, I make no apology for some of the things I said. I mean, some of the things I remember a chap, I won't mention names, who did a review in America. He absolutely loved the book, but he objected to the idea that somehow I has some problems with my sort of talking about it being a surf sport, it not being a surf sport and being more a paddle sport. And there was some issue he had with that. And I basically said, look, the problem is that really it's a cheap marketing ploy to sort of make it fun and sexy, and you try and push it down the road of surfing, when in fact, it's probably more along the lines of kayaking and canoeing in many ways. He didn't like that, but anyway, that's okay. I think he got over it. I know I did. But at the end of the day, I think I probably, what's missing is a book just about, or at least a chapter just about inflatable paddleboards specifically, and actually just how to this idea of discovery learning, not being too strung out about technique and so forth, but yeah, be safe fundamentally. Don't get injured. Just giving some tips about that, and just say go out there and knock yourself out. It's not about being faster than the next guy. It is just basically having fun and discovering nature and getting out, being in the fresh air, and that's really what it's about. I think, and that's the beauty of the sport beyond all other consideration, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and it is a beautiful sport, as are all the water sports. And thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge and opinions. Love it. If you ever want to do any kind of panel discussion, I kind of do those on the side, because I love getting you guys together with great minds to talk, who are willing to talk to each other in this time where some people won't talk, at least in our country, to each other. But again, hold that book up, because someone just asked. Sup FM podcast.
So if you go to canoeculture.com, which is KANU culture, canoeculture.com, you can find the book there.
Which is a fantastic website, by the way. All his other books, it has links to podcasts you're working on and such.
There's just
a lot.
I don't know. There's lots and lots, and I do relate a lot. I relate it to other paddle sports as well. It's a lot about technique stuff as well. This sort of stuff.
Hi, Travis.
Hi, Travis. Yes, my mate Travis. He does be my model for me. So yeah, but look, it's been a real thrill, and I'm really, really, proud and honoured to be speaking to you. As I say, get asked often, so it's nice to be asked once in a while. And I hope I don't come across too opinionated. I don't mean to be like that, but I think that
No.
it's passion. People confuse me
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. I'm very passionate about certain subjects, and as I say, I work very hard to have opinions about some things, and I'm quite happy to cross swords with anyone about some issues, because, as you say, there's things in this sport that probably need ironing out. But from the sporting body, from the recreational, nothing needs sorting at all.
Right.
But for those who want
But
to
you
make it
and
into
I do play in those little niche pieces that do need some ironing out. But you're right. It's generally about the love of water and nature and being outside and enjoying yourself. And I
100%.
think, yeah, I think that really came through. So please, no apologies. It was fantastic to talk with you.
Cool.
Hope to do it again. Hope to meet you someday. I don't know how much you guys travel around the world, but boy, many of the places you've mentioned are destinations I hope to get to. We do have a follow-up group where I will, just because the spelling's a little different, make sure to put your website. Is there anything else in terms of information? Oh, you now have an Instagram account.
Yeah, I'm no longer a virgin. Yeah, so there you go.
I love that.
Yeah.
Honored. I won't. It might start to sound wrong if I if I use some of the words that. No, I won't go there.
Yeah.
Great to meet Mandy too. Again, even though it's virtually, it's certainly better than nothing. But appreciate your time, and SupConnect. Thanks for letting us do this on your forum. Again, stay safe, stay well, and enjoy your paddling.
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
you guys go get his book.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Love you all. Take it. Bye.